All right, here we go, blot and a half. We're learning tonight Maseches Eruvin Daf Samach Zayin and Samach Ches Amud Aleph, if Mark allows. We're going to be starting with a sugya that we already have touched on a little bit about Bittul Rishus. Are we allowed to nullify our Rishus for the sake of blending with someone else's Rishus to minimize the need for an Eruv? That's what we've been discussing of late. And we're starting with the sugya 2/3 of the way down on Samach Vav Amud Beis. And we're beginning with Amar Rabbi right after the word Tzricha, Amar Rabbi. Amar Rabbi, Machlokas Amarim. Hada Amar Shmuel, we're going to have a machlokas about something that Shmuel said. And Shmuel said, Ein bittul rishus mechatzer lechatzer. If I have a rishus in one chatzer and you have a rishus in another, we don't allow for the bittul and therefore the conjoining of those two rishuyos. So Abaye's analysis of that was as follows. Lo amran ela b'shtei chatzerus u'pesach echad beinehen. We're only talking about a case where does Shmuel have his limitation of ein bittul rishus mechatzer lechatzer? That's if you have property A and property B, and there's a door between them, but each of them have their own exit out of their property. So in that case, that's where we say Shmuel's din that there's no bittul. Aval beis chatzeros zo lifnei mizo. If you have two chatzeros, one is at the very back of a closed off road, and one is just before it. So the one that's deeper in the road can only get out. The one that's the pnim can only get out through the chitzoni. That's how it's structured. So one has to travel through the other to get out. So it says Abaye in the name of Shmuel, Aval beis chatzeros zo lifnei mizo mitoch she'osrin umevadlen, because these two are basically working in tandem. Therefore, we do allow for bittul. Now Rava argues the shita of Abaye. Because Rabbi argues the shita of Abaye as it relates to Shmuel, because Abaye said that Shmuel's din of ein bittul rishus mechatzer lechatzer only applies under certain circumstances. Rava Amar afilu shtei chatzeros zo lifnei mizo. Even if you have two chatzeros, one that is all the way at the end of the road and one right before, and the pnim has to go through the chitzon to get out. Pamim mevatlin upamim ein mevatlin. It's not always the case that it is batel, and it's not always the case that it's not batel. The next 15 lines or so, 12 lines approximately, are going to be analyzing this shita of Rava, and it says here the word ketzad. How is this the case? So we're going to learn 3 lines that are a little cryptic, and then we're going to analyze those 3 lines, which will help us to understand the shita of Rava, that when it comes to two chatzeros, where the pnim has to go through the chitzon to get out, so then we have to see how Rava would understand that within Shmuel. Says the Gemara, we are 3 lines before the wide lines on Samach Vav Amud Beis. Ketzad. So case number 1. Nasnu Eruvin bechitzona, if the outer chatzer, the one that's in between the pnim and in between the mavui, if the outer chatzer is where the eruv was put, nasnu Eruvin bechitzona, and then the shachach echad, one person forgot to join the eruv. Bein min hapnimios uvein min hachitzona velo irev shtein asuros. If even one person, either in the pnim, in the inner chatzar, or in the outer chatzar, forgot to be ma'arev, both of these, both spaces are going to be asuros. We will not allow to be able to carry in there. Next case, within this, seemingly this is a source from the Tanaim that's subject to some discussion, but that was case number 1. Case number 2. Nasno, last of the short lines, Nasno Eruvan b'pnimis. If the Eruv wasn't in the chitzon, it was in the pnimis, it was in the innermost chatzer. And then v'shachach echad min ha'pnimis v'lo irev, someone in the inner chatzer forgot to be ma'arev. Here as well, shtehen asuros, both of them are going to be asur. We're 8 lines from the bottom, Samach Vav Amud Beis. Third case, shachach echad min hachitzona v'lo irev. If one person forgot to be ma'arev in the outer chatzer, then pnimis muteres v'chitzona asur. Now, all 3 of these cases require analysis. They're all a little difficult to understand at their face value. So we are going to analyze all 3 of them. And then remember what we're doing. We're trying to show Rava's opinion within Shmuel. Shmuel said that, let me read it again, ein bittul rishus mechatzer lechatzer. Rava says that if it's chatzer pnim and a chatzer chutz, that sometimes the answer is yes, we allow for bittul, and sometimes not. He's qualifying Shmuel's din. So let's see how Rava explains himself. We're 3 lines into the wide lines on Samach Vav Amud Beis. Let's go back over each case. Nasno Eruvin bechitzona. If the Eruv was put in the outer Chatzer, the Shachach Echad, Bein min hapnimis ubein min hachitzona v'lo yirev. And one person, so again, the Eruv is in the outer Chatzer, and someone from one of the two Chatzeros forgot, Shtehen Asuros. So says the Gemara, why is it the Shtehen Asuros? Because Hai bar pnimis, if the person who forgot was inside, if the person who forgot was in the inner Chatzer, Leman Niftel, who is he going to be batel with? Livatel livnei pnimis, leisa le'eruvahu gabayhu. To be mavatel with someone in your same inner Chatzer, that doesn't help, because that's not where the Eruv is. So that doesn't do you any good. Libatel livnei chitzona, but to go and say, I live in the Chatzer pnimi, and I want to be mavatel with the Chatzer chizona, that we can't do because of Shmuel. Ein bittel rishus michatzer lechatzer. And that's only talking about the guy who's on the inner Chatzer. What about the guy in the outer Chatzer? Let's say he's the one who forgot. 5 lines from the bottom of Samach Vav Amud Beis. Hai bar chitzona, if the person who forgot lived in the outer Chatzer, leman nivtil, who's he going to be mavatel with? Levatel livnei chitzona, ika pnimis to asra alayu. To say that he's going to be mavatel with someone from the chitzon, that won't help, because it'll still be usher because of the pnim, because there's no eruv in that space. Libatel livnei pnimis, to be mavatel with someone in the other Chatzer, that's not allowed. Ein bittul rishus mechatzer lechatzer. That's case number 2. So let's try the next case and the source that Rava quoted. Nasno Eruvin b'pnimis, if the Eruv was in fact in the inner Chatzer, the Shachach Echad min hapnimis v'lo irev, and someone in that inner Chatzer, they forgot to make an Eruv, shtein asuros. So as Rava taught us, they're both going to be aser. Why would they both be aser? Because, says the Gemara as follows, 2 lines from the bottom. Hai bar pnimis, this person who lives in the inner Chatzer with the Eruv, leman niftel, livta livnei pnimis, ika chitzona d'asra alayu. To say that he's going to be mavatel in the inner Chatzer where the Eruv is, that's great, but you still have everyone in the outer Chatzer who doesn't yet have a heter to carry, ika chitzona d'asra alayu. And live to livnei chitzona, if the person who forgot lives in the inner Chatzer, he can't be mavatel to those in the outer Chatzer, because ein bittul rishus mechatzer lechatzer. And that brings us to the top of Samach Zayin Amud Aleph in the third case of Rava's proof. Shachach echad min hachitzona v'lo irev. Let's say that someone in the outer Chatzer forgot, so then adds in Rashi. I don't know why this isn't in the Gemara itself, because it's a key line. Rashi, top Rashi, Dibur Hamaskel, Shachach echad min hachitzona v'lo irev. Beha, in this case, Modi Shmuel demavat lebnei chitzona lebnei pnimis. Also rishus sheba lahen lesochan al yedei haregel Eruvin. So here he does allow for bittul. I don't know why it's not in the Gemara, because that was the essential point of Rava, is that Shmuel will sometimes say that there's bittul and sometimes will not. And this third case is the sampling of that. Continues the Gemara, Vadai pnimis muteres. In this case, where the Eruv is in the inside, here's the upside to that. They can always carry if the person who forgot lived on the outside Chatzer. Why? Because you can always close the door. If you have the Eruv inside the inner Chatzer, just close the door, because you can always stay within your property, and then the chitzon can't come in. The door is closed. You have your own space, and then it's mutter to carry. Everyone who lives there can be mevatel to one another, and that works out perfectly. So this is how I'm just going to summarize. I know this is very nuanced, but I'm just going to summarize here. We had a machlokas between Abaye and Rava about a statement of Shmuel. Shmuel said the following statement: "In bittul rishus mechatzer lechatzer." If I live in one location and you live in another, we can't nullify our properties toward one another in order to ease up the restrictions of carrying. Now, Abaye and Rava had a machlokas where that applies. Does it apply in a case where the chatzer is a chatzer pnimi and a chatzer chisona? So the shita of Abaye was that the limitation doesn't apply there and it's mutter. And Rava says sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And the last 12 lines showed us the case that's exactly on the top of Samach Zayin Amud Aleph, where Rava highlighted to us that there's a case where we see that Shmuel would be of the opinion that we allow for bittul michatzer lechatzer. It does exist. And that's the precedent that Rava quotes and why Rava holds what he holds. So that's where we are up to now. Now we're on the third line, Samach Zayin Amud Aleph. Says the Gemara, a question on what we just learned. There's one thing that you just taught, Rabbi, that I don't understand. If one of the people who forgot lived in the inner Chatzer, it should not be that both the inner Chatzer and the outer Chatzer are both aser. Live till high bar pnimis, livnei pnimis, v'teisei chitzona v'sishterei b'hadayu. then the person who is in the inner chatzir who forgot should be mevatel himself with the others, and then you should be able to allow everyone in the outer chatzir to carry because they have the eruv. It all should have worked out perfectly. So says the Gemara in response, Kiman, your presumption assumes that that holds like the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. What does Rabbi Eliezer hold? Your question assumes that not everyone needs to have bittul together. However, ki ka'amina l'rabbanan, what Rava responds to them is ki ka'amina l'rabbanan. What Rava says is what I was intending when I was talking about my opinion on the bottom of Samach Vav Amud Beis, and I said that Shtei and Asuros, that in both the Chatzar Pnimi and the Chatzar Chitzona would both be Asur in this case, that is according to the Shita of the Rabbanan. Why? Why would they both be Asur? The assumption seems reasonable. Let the people in the Pnimis, they should all be Mavatal to each other, and then everyone in the outside Chatzar should be able to carry. Says the Gemara, no, Rava says it was the Rabbanan, the Amri, they held Tzarech Levatil kol echad ve'echad. And because not everyone in the Chitzon was mevatel in the process of the people in the Pnimius becoming nullified into one another's properties, therefore Shtei and Asuros, and that brings us to the two dots about 8-9 lines down. Rav Chizda and Rav Sheshes lived in approximately the 4th century of the Amoraim, and they had tremendous respect for one another. So much so that says the Gemara, Rav Chizda and Rav Sheshes, kipage bahade hadade, when they would greet each other in the street, Rav Chizda mirta an sifavase mimasniyasa de Rav Sheshes. Rav Chizda was literally, his lips were trembling when he would meet. Who was trembling here? Rav Sheshes kipage. Rav Sheshes would be trembling. No, Rav Chizda would be trembling his lips when he met Rav Sheshes, because Rav Sheshes knew all of the Mishnayos and Braisos. He knew them all Baal Peh. So the Meforshim here point out that he was afraid that that Rav Sheshes would ask him a stira in 2 sources in the Tanaim and force him to give an answer when he wouldn't know the answer, because Rav Sheshes was an Ilui when it came to comparing these two. But Rav Sheshes mirta kule gufe mipil pule de Rav Chizda. And while it's true that Rav Sheshes knew of himself that he knew the Mishnais and the Brises, but the pilpul, the capacity to ask a very powerful question that Rav Chizda had, it made Rav Sheshes his whole body shake. And in this case, we have a question from Rav Chizda. Ba'amine Rav Chizda me Rav Sheshes. So here is the brilliant mind asking the perfect memory a question, right? You're asking someone who's got the pilpul head against someone who knows every Mishnah and Bryce. So let's see how the question plays out. And of course, it's going to be connected to our topic. We're 1/3 of the way down Samach Zayin Amud Aleph. Ba'amine Rav Chizda me Rav Sheshes. Shnei batim mishnei tzidei reshus harabim. You have 2 houses across the path, across a reshus harabim. Now, normally you can't carry in between. Midoraisa you might be able to, but not midorabanan. And then, uvo nachrim, non-Jews on Shabbos arrived, v'hikifum mechitza b'Shabbos, and they surrounded the property on Shabbos, mahu. What is the din? So here we're talking about still eruve chatzeros. Am I allowed to be, Rashi highlights this is Rashi Dibur Hamaskal Mahu, right in the middle of the page. Mahu sheyivatel zeh reshuso lezeh, v'yehi muter lahotzimi beso lekan. Am I allowed to blend my chutzner with yours? Because remember, Shmuel, normally we say ein bittul mi reshus l'reshus, mi chutzner l'chutzner. What about here? Do we apply it here as well? So as says the Gemara as follows: Aliba demand to Amar, according to the opinion who says ein bittul reshus mi chutzner l'chutzner, which we know is Shmuel. According to the sheet of Shmuel, lo tibaylach, of course it's going to be forbidden. Why? Says the Gemara. Had it been that we knew what was going on Friday, we didn't, of course, and had it been that we wanted to do this on Friday, there even Shmuel would have said, Ein bittul reshus mechatzer lechatzer. So hacha, what would Shmuel say? Even if you wanted to make the Eruvin from yesterday, we didn't know the goyim were going to come and do this. All the more so you're not going to be able to. So therefore, that's not where the question is. The only question of Rav Chizda is in the following case. Halfway down, Samach Zayin Madal, Kiti Bailach, Aliba Demand Damar, Yesh Betel Reshus Mechatzer Lechatzer. The only question applies when you have the Shita, which is the Shita of Rabbi Yochanan, that allows for Bittel of my Reshus to your Reshus, even though it's Chatzer Lechatzer. And how do we understand the question? It goes as follows. Hasam, in a regular case, in a regular case, I could understand that because I could have been ma'arev from chatzar to chatzar before Shabbos, so then I can also do bittul before Shabbos, no problem. But here, aval hacha, in the case where the goyim where he kifun mechitza, to lo matzi me'arvei me'esmal, I couldn't have made an eruv note with this knowledge because I didn't know they were coming. B'tulei nami lo matzi mevatel o dilma lo shna. Would we also say that just like we couldn't make an eruv, we can't do bittul, or would we even allow for bittul in this case? Amar le, Rav Chizda answers, ein mevatlin, you're not allowed. This is quoted in Shulchan Aruch this way. Then the Gemara transitions into a variant case here and asks the following question. Meis nachri b'Shabbos mahu. What happens if you had an eruv that was made problematic by a nachri, and unfortunately the nachri passes away on Shabbos? So now you don't have a nachri anymore. You have a mace. So how does that work in regards to bittul reshus? Says the Gemara, mahu. Are we allowed to be mevatel his reshus, basically to say his reshus is no longer problematic? So says the Gemara. Aliba demanda amar sochrin loti bailach. According to the Shita, as we saw yesterday, that allows for us to do schira even on Shabbos, as long as it's not with money, but with anything that's less than a shava pruta. So according to the Shita that says that we can be socher on Shabbos, loti bailach, we know that under those circumstances that we could for sure be mavatel the space of the nachri when he died. Hashta tarte avdinan chada mibaya. Now that you've allowed us to do two things, Rashi is the first of the longest lines of Rashi. Hashta tarte avdinan, schirus u bittel. You've allowed me to rent and you've allowed me to do bittel on Shabbos. Then chada miboya. Then the only one thing that you need me to do, which is bittel in this case of the property of the nachri, of course that's going to be mutter. So says the Gemara, we're not asking the question according to the opinion that says that you're allowed to be socher property on Shabbos if the scenario comes up when the guy comes home. Elakiti bailach, back in the Gemara, 10 lines from the bottom. Elakiti bailach. What is the question that's being asked when a mace, when a nachri dies? Says the Gemara, Elakiti bailach aliba demadamar ein sochrin. But according to the Shita, says that we do not allow for the renting of property on Shabbos. Tartehu delo avdinan. But you're right, we can't do both. We can't do schira and bittel on Shabbos. But hachada avdinan. But maybe we can do only bittel. Maybe we can therefore allow ourselves to carry when the nachri dies. Or dilma lo shna. Or maybe we would say that there's no difference. And which way would it be? Or dilma, and we should say lo shna, that there's no difference, and therefore it's prohibited to free up this chatzir where the nachri died. Omar le, this is a machlokes. Rav Sheshes answers the question. Ani omer mevatlin v'hamnuna. Amar ein mevatlin. Machlokes samoraim about what happens if a nachri dies. How are we allowed to remove him from the property? Can we be mevatel his reshus? Yes or no? That's a machlokes in the Gemara. 2 dots, 6 lines from the bottom of the page. The rest of it's a little easier. Baruch Hashem. Amar Rabbi Yehuda. What's that?
The rest of the Safta or like?
No, just the rest of today.
Okay.
No. This was like a jawbreaker a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, you guys can all come back now.
This is confusion update.
Hashem Yirachim. What daf are we on? 67. Okay. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. 6 lines from the bottom. Nachri sheyesh lo pesach arba al arba pasuach lebika. Let's say that I have a chatzir and the nachri has a chatzir, but the nachri has an exit to the mavui without me having access to it. So let's say my Gemara is the 2 chatzeres. Here, the Jew lives right here, and the nachri lives right here, and both of us could bleed into a mavui over here, but the nachri has his own exit out to the back. Okay, he has his own private exit. So that's what the Gemara is entertaining here. How does that work in regards to Eruvin Chatzeros? That's the Gemara's question here. Nachri sheyesh lo pesach arba al arba pasuach lebika. It goes out into an open space, a usable space. So then says the Gemara Kula. This is the Shita of Shmuel. Afilu machnes umotzi gmalim ukronos kol hayom kulo derech mavui. Even if he often uses the same entrance into the mavui that the Jew would use, this guy, because he has his own exit, he will not ruin the chatzar for everyone. You don't have to rent from him. It's fine. You could just carry with your Eruv, with your other Jews, but you don't have to rent from the guy. Why? My time, 3 lines from the bottom, because he likes that opening more than he likes the mavui. Rashi. Where is this Rashi? 2 lines from the bottom. Why does he like this larger doorway? Because the space he's going out to in a bika is this large, open, fresh space, and it's better than the mavui that's crowded with people. He basically has a big private backyard. So of course he's going to want to go there. So that's why the Gemara says that if the Nachri has an exit from his Chatzer into a Bika, he doesn't ruin. We don't have to factor him in regards to Eruvin Chatzeros.
Meaning he won't use the front.
He can even use the front, which is the Chiddush of Shmuel. That's what he said. Even if he goes out with Gemal and Mukronos, he goes out with camels and carriages, we don't care. His personal preference is to use that back alley, the backyard, because it's private, it's much less crowded than the Mavui per Rashi, right? So he likes that space a little bit more. So again, if this is the property of the Jew, and this is the property of the non-Jew, he's got his own backyard over here, done. We don't have to rent from him. We don't need to rent from him for Eruvin Chatzeros. That's a Chiddush of Shmuel, even though he uses the Mavui just like the Jew does. Yeah? Yeah, that's the language. The last three lines. It was that afilu machnisu motzi gmal ukronos kol hayom kulo derech mavui. Even though he uses the mavui regularly for large things like camels and carriages, doesn't make a difference. He has a special backyard, and that potters the Jews from needing to rent from him. He has the option, and that eases things up for the Jews. However, what if that space wasn't the bika? We know a karfeif is a space that's less likely to be filled with brush. Maybe it's a small lake of some kind, something that's not as usable. So mahu. So Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Ami, Mishmei de Ulfina. Take a look at a beautiful Rashi. What's Ulfina or Ulpina? Rashi, last one on the page. Sheshama me rabo verabo me rabo. And thus we have the name of an ulpan or an ulpana, which is a school that we learn. That's what the letter aleph, the word aleph, means to learn. I asked a bracha from Rav Chaim David Pinto. I asked a bracha from him for learning. So he took my Mishnah and he flipped to the opening cover and he took a pen and he wrote aleph, aleph, aleph. You wrote Aleph Lamed Fei, Aleph Lamed Fei, Aleph Lamed Fei 3 times in a row. He goes, just look at this every time you learn. I subsequently left that Mishnah on an airplane, which is very frustrating. But that's this idea. Ulfana is a learning. It's our Masorah. So anyways, the Gemara says here, what's the answer? Can the guy who has a karfeif in his backyard, which is different than a bika, does the karfeif also work? Rav Nachman bar Ami Mishmei Ulfana, turning to the top of Samach Zayin and Beis, Afilu Pasuach lekarfeif. Even there we have the kula. However, Rabbi Rav Yosef, Damre Tarbaihu, it depends. What about the karpef? There are limitations. Nachri, Baya Agoy, Besa Saim Oser, up to two Besa Saim, that's going to be forbidden. There we would say he still is a part of the chatzar, we have to rent from him. But if the karpef was Yoser mi Besa Saim Eino Oser, then he wouldn't challenge our carrying, and we wouldn't have to rent from him. However, it's the reverse with the Yisrael. The Yisrael, if the Yisrael had his own private little backyard and it was a karpef, Beisa Saim Eino Oser. If he had his own backyard and it was up to Beisa Saim, it's not a problem. But Yoser mi Beisa Saim Oser, that would be a problem. And Rashi here, just to the left of us, a little bit up, Dibur Hamas Yoser, 6th line of Rashi, Yisrael, excuse me. Rashi, Dibur Masal Yisrael. He says, "Sheish lo Pesach lekarpei hu Pesach lemavui v'shachach v'lo irev b'mavui." What's the case? The Jew forgot to be me'arev, but he has a karpei. So it says the Gemara, "Im karpei beisa asayim hu sheroi lishtamesh bo eino oser al bnei mavui." If I have my private backyard, my private karpei, so it's mutter to use it, no problem at all. I don't ruin it. I don't ruin it for anybody else. I forgot to be me'arev, no problem at all. All right, so now we're on the 4th line of the Gemara, Samach Zayin Amud Beis. Ba'minei Rabba bar Chaklai me Rav Huna. Pasuch lekarpef mahu. This is the same question we asked about the goy earlier, just being repeated by a different Amora, short and sweet. Amar le hare amru beisa saim oser yosmer beisa saim eno oser. It depends by a goy. If he up to beisa saim, it would he would still aser for the Jews without renting from him. Yoser me beisa saim eno oser. But if the space of his karpef was more than beisa saim, then he would not cause for a problem. Amar Ula, we're going to speak about some halachos of karpef now, ones that intersect with a carmelis on floating in the water. Let's get into it. 6 lines down, Samach Zayin Amud Beis. Amar Ula, Amar Rav Yochanan. This is the sheet of Rav Yochanan. We're going to come back to this shortly. Rav Yochanan is an important player in the Gemara for an important question that will come up. Karpef Yosem Beisa Asayim Shalahu Kaf Ladira. Let's say you have a very, very large enclosed space. It's a Beisa Asayim and it's not Hukaf Ladira. It is not meant to be used for a living. Afilu kur ve'afilu kuraim, even if it's huge. Hazorek l'socho chayiv. If you throw something into that space, you are chayiv. My taima, because there are walls all the way around. It's hukaf, just not ladira. So that's called a reshus hayachid. If I have a karpef, it's basically private property. It's kind of like going to like a forest and seeing a fence around it. That fence, afal that it's not a livable space, but it's still a reshus hayachid. So if I throw from reshus rabin into a karpef, so that's going to be an Isser Doraisa, says the Gemara. My time. Well, what's the reason why? Because Mechitza Helish Mechuseres Diurim. So Masi Rav Huna Bar Chinuna. I have a question against the Shita of Rav Yochanan. A little bit of a lengthy question, but a question nevertheless. Says the Gemara as follows: Sela Shebeyam. Let's say that there's a rock that partially protrudes from the water. Not quite an island, but just a rock formation that kind of pops up out of the water. Okay, and what's the size of this rock formation above the water? Obviously, below the water, it's larger. But what does it look like above the water? So it's gavoa asara v'rachav arba'a. So then, what's the halacha? It protrudes from the ground 10 tfachim by 4 by 4. That's a reshus hayachid shear. So then, ein metaltalin lo min tocho liyam v'lo min hayam l'tocho. You can't carry from it to the water and from the water to it because it's a carmelis. Because it's like a quasi reshus hayachid type of space, because it's 10 by 4 by 4. And then the end of this source is very difficult to understand, which we're going to analyze. Pachos mikan, had it been less than this, than metalton, then we would be able to carry. Ad kama, ad besa sayin. How much? Until it is, how much? Ad kama, ad besa sayin. So we have to understand, what is this comment going on? The Mishnah had two statements before this. The one statement that it had, the first one, again, we're right now, Masi Rav Huna Bar Chinuna, the first line he said is that if a rock protrudes from the water 10 tefachim tall, 4 by 4, you cannot carry. So, and the second one says that if it's less than that, you can carry. And then it says how much, up to Beis Hasayim. Was that going on the first comment or the second comment? Says the Gemara, Ahaya. What line was that last comment going on, the limitation of Beis Hasayim? Ilema aseifa. If you want to say it was talking about the seifa where you're allowed to carry, it said pachos mikan metaltalin, that you're allowed to carry as long as it's not beis hasayim. So it says the Gemara, if it's talking about the seifa, beis hasayim hu de metaltalinon tfeilo. Why couldn't you carry in something that's more than a beis hasayim? Who cares? It's a carmelis or it's not a carmelis. Mikarmelis kamataltel. There's no problem at all. There's no reason why that shouldn't be allowed. Elolav, it must be that the third line of limitation of beis hasayim is talking about the reisha. V'hachi kamar. And here is pshat in this in the source that Rav Huna quoted. Halfway down, just about halfway down on Samach Zayin and Beis. Sela shebeyam gavoa asar v'rochav dalid. If you have a rock that protrudes from the water 10 tefachim tall, 4 width, 4 depth, ein metaltalin lo mitocho liyam v'lo min hayam l'tocho. You're not allowed to carry from the rock to the water or from the water to the rock. Ve'ad kama, until what size? How large can the rock be? Ad beis hasayim. That's when you're not allowed. Hayeser mi beis hasayim metaltalina. But then you are allowed to carry from the then you're allowed to carry throughout the entire space if it's more than beis hasayim. Alma karmelisi tiyuv to the Rav Yochanan. We see that it's a carmelis, yet Rav Yochanan deemed it to be a reshus hayachid. So Amar Rava, Rava gave a lot of musar. Mandalo yada trutze masnaisa. If you don't know how to read a Mishnah, please keep your mouth shut. Tiyuv to mosiv leila Rav Yochanan. If you're going to ask a question against Rav Yochanan, you need to make sure you know how to read a Mishnah. There's no reason why you should be talking if you're not sure what you're talking about. So it says the Gemara, La'olam HaReisha. Really, the line that says that Beis Hasayim was talking about the Reisha, the part where it says that you're not allowed to carry, and here's how it works out. V'hachi kamar, habesocho metaltalinon. On top of the rock, you're allowed to carry. Ve'ad kama ad Beis Hasayim. You're only allowed to carry on the rock if it is up to a maximum size of Beis Hasayim. That's without touching any water, just walking on top of the rock formation. Rav Ashi Amar La'olam HaReisha. He agrees, but for a different reason. Rav Ashi highlights Hein Amru Behein Amru. There were two different Dinei D'Rabbanan, two different rabbinic injunctions that were interplaying over here, and here's how they worked. We're 2/3 of the way down. Samach Zayin Amud Aleph. Hein Amru Karpev. They said that if you have a very large, unusable space that's larger than a Beis Hasayim, and it was not hukaf ladir, it was not meant to be lived in, you only have dalet amos, that's one din. They also said another rabbinic injunction, how do these two things play against each other? So says the Gemara as follows. Besa Sayim Deshari Litil Tule Bekule. If you have a space that's up to a Besa Sayim, there Chazal said you can carry the entire area. There they said, Asri Rabbanan Litil Tule Lo Min Hayam Litocho V'Lo Mitocho Layam. If you're allowed to carry on the rock formation up to Besa Sayim, if that's the total flat space of the walkable space of the rock formation is that it's less than a Besa Sayim, there we add the rabbinic injunction, Asrei Rabbanan L'til Tule, Lo Min Hayam L'tocho, V'Lo Min Tocho Layam. That's where you're not allowed to carry from the rocks to the water and the water to the rocks. My taima, because Rishus HaYachid Gemurahi, because we're treating this rock formation like a Rishus HaYachid, because you're allowed to walk the whole thing, granted only rabbinically, but nevertheless, we treat it like a Rishus HaYachid. But Yeser Mi Besa Sayim, but had it been that the flat of the rock formation was more than a Besa Sayim, the Asr Litzal Tule Bekule, there you're not allowed to carry the whole space, you're only allowed to carry Dalet Amos. So there says the Gemara, Sharu Rabbanan, the Rabbanan made a strange leniency. You're not allowed to walk the whole space, but you are allowed to go into the water. Sharu Rabbanan Litzal Tule Mitocha Layam Umin Hayam L'tocha. Why were they lenient here? My taima. Why is it that you're only allowed Dalet Amos on top of the rock formation that's huge, but you're also then allowed to go from the water to the rock and the rock to the water, which is from a Carmelist? It's very strange. My taima, because Dilma Amre Rishus HaYachid Gemurahi V'Asi Litzal Tule B'Kula. We were afraid that people would misunderstand the rock formation and think it's a Rishus HaYachid and think that you can carry the whole space. Says the Gemara, but a moment ago when it was less than Besa Sayim, you didn't allow that. So why are you saying over here that when the rock formation has a flat surface of Yeser Mi Besa Sayim, there we allow you to go into the water? What does one thing have to do with the other? Umay Shna. Why over here are we being lenient to let you go in the water when the rock formation has a flat surface of more than Besa Sayim? So says the Gemara, the reason is very practical. Tocho Shchiach. It's much more common for someone to walk the whole flat of the rock formation. However, mitocho layam, umiyam letocho lo shchiach. That's uncommon. So therefore, they were more lenient about going from a rock formation that's yeser mi beis asayim to the water, as opposed to a place that's pachos mi beis asayim to the water. There, they did not allow that. See, just as easy as the previous section. All right, a little bit of story, much more easy halacha here about bris milah a little bit. Well, kind of, sort of. There was an assumption back in the day, and one that highlights something which is crucial. The assumption back in the day is that on the day of the baby's bris, he needed hot water to clean him. That was an assumption, and you were allowed to violate Yisurim to that end. But in this case, says the Gemara, last of the short line, Samach Zayin Amid Beis, says the Gemara, Hahu Yanukat Ishtapi Chamime, his hot water spilled. So he was about to have a bris, and the hot water spilled. So Amar Lahu Rabba, Rabba said, "Naisu lechamime mi go beisoi. I have hot water in my house. Go to my house, and bring some of the hot water over here, and we'll use it for the bris." Amar le Abaye v'halo arvina. There's no eruv over here. Amar le nismo chashituv. Don't worry, we did shitufe muvos. It's sufficient. You don't need eruv b'chatzeros here. Go do your thing. Go get me some water. Amar le, fifth line from the bottom. Halo shatfina. We also don't have shitufe muvos here, so you have no reason that you're allowed to carry. So then what does Rabba say? Guy, I understand what you're saying. So Nemru, we should say, Nemru le lenachri leisile. We should have a non-Jew bring us the hot water. That would work, because that's only on Mir La'akum, which is an Isur D'Rabbanan, and you're not doing the Isur D'Rabbanan, and it's a Mir La'akum b'makom mitzvah. It's perfect. We should have the guy bring the hot water for the bris. So it says the Gemara, Amar Abaye. Abaye said, because Rabba had asked this question to Abaye. Rabba was 3rd century, Abaye was 4th century. So Amar Abaye, Boi le'osve lemar, I wanted to push back and ask another question, but the lo shavkan Rav Yosef, my Rebbe Rav Yosef would not let me. Why? Amar Rav Yosef, Amar Rav Kahana, ki havinan be Rav Yehuda, hava Amar Lon. When they were with Rav Yehuda, he taught them the following din. Bide oraisa, by dine de oraisa, mosvinan tiyuvta. We ask all of our difficult questions. The hadar abdinan maisa. And only afterwards do we act. However, b'derabbanan, when it comes to rabbinic laws, when it's not everywhere, and the Meforshim point out it's not in the case of Suffolk, it's where a Rav asks you to do something and you have a kasha on it. So by a din d'oraisa, you ask your question. By din d'rabbanan, you're allowed to act. B'derabbanan avdinan ma'isa b'hadar mosvinan tiyuvta. So here, so fine. And so he went and he had the guy go bring the water, and it worked out perfectly. They used Amir La'akum. After the whole bris, after the baby was fine, everything worked out well. Levasar hachi amar li, my bais laosve lamar. What was bugging you when Rabba told you that you can go get the hot water by usage of a goy, by Amir al-Akum, what was bothering you? Why can't we do Amir al-Akum? What were you concerned about? So Abaye answered, Amrei le Titanya, because we have a brisa. Hazah shvus. We know that hazah, the sprinkling of the mechatas, was considered an isser derabanan. And we also know ve'amir l'nachri shvus. We also know that the isser of asking a non-Jew to do something for you on Shabbos is also an isser derabanan. Turning to the top of Maseches and Aleph, says the Gemara, what was the assumption that Abaye made? It's not really an assumption, it's a brisa. Mahazah shvus ve'ino doches haShabbos, just like hazah is an isser derabanan, and you're not allowed to be doches haShabbos. Afamir l'nachri shvus ve'ino doches haShabbos. So that's what I was concerned about, is that I don't understand why Amir l'nachri should be mutter in such a case. It should be permissible. So Amar Le, he responds, you can't make a distinction between hazah, the sprinkling of the mechatas, which is an action-based thing, you're actually moving your hands, versus asking an akum to move his hands. They're totally different, and you should have made the distinction on your own. So what they pushed back to Abaye was when Rabbi said to you, you're not allowed to carry it yourself because, I didn't realize there was no shitufe muvos. Let's ask an akum. You should have said, I got it. Shitufe muvos, that would be me carrying. But the goy, I'm not carrying. The goy is doing all the work. So that you should have thought that was permissible. And here the Hagos Habach takes out the next words of Deha Mar Lo Amar Lo Nachri Zil Achim. We took that out, although we could have. It's not so difficult to explain, but he points out it's not an accurate defus of our Gemara. So sixth line of Maseches and Aleph, getting toward the end of the day today. Are we close to? No, we're doing okay. Says the Gemara as follows: Amar le Rabba bar Rav Chanan le Abaye, Mavoa to Isbe Tre Gavre Ravreve Kirabanan. In a mavui that has two remarkable Talmidei Chachamim like Rabba and like Abaye, I don't understand. Lo le Habibe lo Eruv lo Shituv. They don't have an Eruv, they don't have Shitufe Muvos. The people in their area can't carry on Shabbos. You're crippling everybody. You should make the Eruv, you should make the Shituv. For those who are proponents of an Eruv, this is a Gemara that's going to be quoted. This is the quill, and this is like the quill. It's perfect. You can write down, check out my Gemara. The Gemara says right here, you should have made an Eruv. Says then, what does the Gemara say? Amar le, my nevad, what should I do? Mar lo orche, one person he doesn't do that. Ana tridna bigir soy, I'm sitting and learning. Inhu lo mishkeche, they don't care, everyone's happy. Okay, so fine. Why don't you just do wine? Bi akne lehu pita bisala. Oh, sorry, we didn't get to the wine yet. Sorry, I jumped the gun. Bi akne lehu pita bisala. If you're going to be make a kinyan with the bread that's on the table, kevan deibau leminoe velo efshar leisvane halayhu batil shituf. If you would have said, "Can I have the bread?" That's all the bread I have. And if it's all the bread you have, then you can't use it as a shituf because the food has to be available to people. So I couldn't have even used the bread on my table. Batil shituf. The Tanya, the Brisa writes. If the food has to be accessible, and if somebody asks for wine and oil and you say, I'm sorry, I can't give it to you, the shitufe muvos falls apart. So you can't even use the bread that you have for Shabbos because you're eating that bread, you need it. That's your sustenance. You don't have a choice. That's all you have left. So fine. So says the Gemara, 1/3 of the way down Maseches and Aleph, fine, but there's another way. There's another way to be ma'arev or to be meshatev. You can say a revis of the wine that's in my barrel. You got plenty of wine. So it says the Gemara, that should work. So it says the Gemara, Tanya ein mishtatfin ba'otzar. But hold on, we have a brisa that says that it doesn't work in an otzar, and v'hatanya mishtatfin machlokes. So we have two brisas that don't agree. One says that you're allowed to be mishatef, you're allowed to make an eruv with wine that's in your cellar, and one says that you're not. This machlokes that we have here is similar to Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Now, before we go to Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, what are we talking about here? What we're talking about is what we spoke about many blot ago called yesh breira or ein breira. Namely, let's say I have 20 barrels in my cellar, 20 bottles of wine. I don't know which one I'm going to drink, and I don't want to decide now. So I randomly say one of the bottles of wine is going to be for shitufe muvos. So it says the Gemara, machlokes in the Brisa, if breira works. Do we allow us to say the unknown bottle of wine, which I may drink and therefore it'll transfer to another bottle of wine, the unknown of which bottle it is, do we allow for that to be the case, yesh breira, in which case mishtatfin, that's the second Brisa, or do we say ein breira? No, we cannot have a theoretical guess of which bottle of wine. We need to know exactly what's going on, and because we don't know when we're guessing, therefore the first Brisa, ein mishtatfin. And the Gemara says, don't worry, this is The yesh breira, ein breira conversation is old. It goes back to Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel. Where did we see it by them? Halfway down, says the Gemara, in a case of a person who dies in a house. Ditznan. This is a mission about Tumas Ohel. Hames babayis v'lo psachim harbe kulan tmein. If a mace dies in a house and there are 4 doorways, all 4 doorways are going to be considered tummy. We don't know which one the mace is going to exit. So anything that's underneath that doorway will be tummy because of tumas ohel, because we don't know. It's an unknown of where the mace will exit. Next case in this Mishnah, niftach echad mehen. If one door is being used, then hu tameh v'chulan tahorin. Then that one door will become tameh, and all the other doors, the tumas ohel doesn't apply under the doorways. Let's say in your brain, you're like, I want to use the back door. It's a sliding door. It's a bigger door. It's an easier way to get the mace out. Or a larger window that's 4x4. Matil al kol hapsachim kulan. Then you're good. You're good to go. Then there's no tuma anywhere other than where the mace is going to exit. Beis Shammai says you have to have decided before the person died, because he holds of ein breira. It can't be a guess. We have to know. I need to know which door it is. So we say it's door 1. And if I knew that before the person died, that if someone were to die, I'm going to use door 1, then it's not breira anymore. I know exactly what door it is. That's when we say that the tuma doesn't apply to other doors. You can even decide after he dies. The moment he died, we didn't know what door it was. Breira. Don't worry about it. We're all good. And that's how the Gemara explains that our case of being mishtatev with wine in the otzar has a machlokes. They're both a question of breira. Do we paskin yesh breira or ein breira? The machlokes that we have by the wine is the same machlokes that we have by Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel in regards to whether or not we need to know prior to the death of the person as to where we will take him out of the house. Last case for the night, another case of a bris where the water was spilled. Another case where there was going to be a bris and the hot water spilled. Amar lahu Rava. Rava was very clever. He said, "Nishayle ve'ime itzricha." Ask the mother who is a chola she'ein bo sakana, even if she's only a chola she'ein bo sakana. So there, you're allowed to ask for someone to do isurei derabanan. So there was one Shabbos that I was in bed and my migraine medication was in my car. So that's chola she'ein bo sakana, and I was actually not home, so it didn't help. But technically speaking, I could have asked someone to violate an isur derabanan. But then you have to get into all the lumdas of like what lights are turning on in your car. Are they incandescent? Are they LEDs? That was all real shilas in halacha. It's got to be, I presume, some incandescent light bulbs still on some cars. I don't know. But had it only been an Isser Derabanan, it would have been mutter. So that's what Rava was thinking. Go see if the mother needs hot water. And if she does, nachim le nachri agav ime. Let the guy do the work for the hot water for the mother. And while he's warming up water for the mother, we'll chaparayin and get some for the baby as well. Amar le Rav Mishar Shel Rava. No, he was looking at the mother. She's sitting up and eating regular. She's eating regular food, which was like dates, was a normal food. Amar le, no, amor tunva be'alma hu denakala. No, she's not healthy. She's probably a little bit in shock, and that's why it looks like she's eating normally, but really she's still a chola she'ein bo sakana. We're going to stop here for the night. We'll pick up on Shabbos with Hahu Yenuka, yet another story of spilled water, and we'll do Samech Ches. Amud Beis and Samach Tes on Shabbos. All right. Have a beautiful night, everybody.